community? It is Shamika, and I am back for part 2 of office hours. So we had a couple of questions come in that I wanted to answer. As I mentioned, we're going to change the format a little bit of office hours so that we're able to, one, get some great content out there for you guys, as well as give people who aren't able to attend office hours a chance to get their questions answered. So part of that format is at the beginning of office hours, we'll answer a couple of questions, and then we'll, of course, open it up as we typically do to an open forum for people to ask any specific or agency specific types of questions. So welcome to office hours. Again, office hours will be every other Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. If you can't make it, that's fine. Feel free to join us on our YouTube channel where you can catch the hashtag replays of all the office hour questions that I answer. If you have a question that hasn't been answered, feel free to drop it either on our YouTube page, our LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook group, Facebook page, TikTok, and we will compile the questions and drop them into our office hours throughout the next coming sessions. As always, if you have any feedback or have different experiences, definitely feel free to comment below and share your own experience with that particular question. But in the meantime, let's get started. So this question actually came in through our Facebook group, which I enjoy. And this one is about finding malpractice insurance. And this is a question that I think a lot of people have had some challenges with over the past 3 years, and is partly due to just the nature of the climate, as well as an understanding of how insurance works. So business insurance doesn't work that much differently than car insurance or home insurance or boat insurance or bike insurance. So as an industry, as we've seen, the healthcare industry has more risk, it'll create more challenges with obtaining those insurances and or increase the premiums, which is what I think a lot of people have seen. So a lot of the businesses that we've shared in previous years that have offered staffing insurance or staffing business insurance either create a little bit more requirements on getting the insurance, have increased the premium, or are no longer offering that type of coverage, or all three. So this question is saying, I'm having a hard time finding malpractice insurance for my employees. They keep telling me that they will have to be independent contractors and that the piece of purpose is staffing parameters and non-competes. Great. So this is actually a good question because it kind of ties into a question I answered earlier today around the company ShiftKey and kind of what they do. And one of the changes, and hopefully in the next coming weeks, we'll have a representative from an insurance company talk more about it. One of the changes with technology that we've seen an influx of the role of healthcare staffing professionals from employees, whether it's employees of the facility or employees of agencies, into this independent contractor. And I think I've done an amazing job, and you guys let me know, but I've done a spectacular job of staying away from the independent contractor 1099 conversation because it's complicated. I'm nobody's insurance professional. I'm nobody's accountant or tax professional. So there's a lot of pieces that play into how a person's job is classified. So not to get too deep with you guys today and just quickly answer the question is that's an interesting response from an insurance company because typically if you're an independent contractor, you get your own insurance. So one thing for people to understand is that the person can't be an employee and be an independent contractor. And like she's mentioning here, it kind of defeats the purpose of having a staffing agency if they're independent contractors to an extent, right? If I'm an independent contractor, and it's not really to say that healthcare professionals can't be that, because there are some of us that are, It's just to say in a lot of the roles that we staff for, they don't always meet the qualifications. And some of this can be like state specific. And there's a lot more variables to, identifying employee versus independent contractor, and how you as an agency owner can determine that particular individual's classification. Like, is this person an employee or are they an independent contractor? And of course, that all plays into how you provide coverage and things of that nature for them, or if you provide it. I would go back in this question and kind of get more clarification from that particular organization around where we're going with this, just because you're wanting to get malpractice coverage for your employees, which makes sense. But it's unusual for the response to be that they need to be independent contractors, because in that case, they can go out and get their own individual policy themselves, which I believe is kind of the standard. So just like we would, as individual nurses, many of us coming out of school were told to get a liability policy. I use NSO. I don't know the NSO still does those things, but nonetheless, that was to cover us just in case our employer or something happened and our employee didn't have the full coverage for something that may have happened that needs coverage. So I hope that answers your question. Keep coming with the questions, and thanks. So let's move on to our next question. And this is a good question too, because this question comes up a ton of times. And you can't always give clear answers. And it's kind of challenging in this climate to help people in that way, because I don't think, and you guys let me know in the comments, our industry is stabilized. So we entered in 2017, 2018, and things were a lot clearer when it came around bill rates, VMS, insurance. So now that we're going into 2024, I feel like even though the waters are definitely not as challenging as they may have been during the pandemic, they're still a little muddy. So I try to be as transparent and honest with people as far as like, hey, what makes sense? And realistically, creating a bill sheet will look the way it'll look no matter what the industry is. But I think with our industry kind of having still a little bit of a level of uncertainty, it can look a little tricky. But just to answer your question, I would say some of the things you want to think about even before you start the process of creating a bill rate is what's going on in your market. So because nurses are paid so vastly differently depending on what state they're located in, whether they're in a metropolitan area or a rural area, those are all factors that you have to take into consideration. So one, you want to kind of create a bill rate or a bill sheet based on where you're located. And I'll give an example here, and I'll use Delaware as the example. So, and you guys, as always, feel free to chime in. In the northern part of Delaware that is located closer to Philadelphia, which is a major metropolitan city in Pennsylvania, the bill rate, the pay rate is very different than as you go further south, where you have more suburban, rural areas, beach towns. So it's all still Delaware. The process of compliance is all the same. The types of facilities are very similar, LTAC, long-term care, or, hospitals or things of that nature. And you could work at CS healthcare system in the southern part of Delaware, and then CS healthcare system in the northern part of Delaware, and there be a slight pay difference. Now, I will say most healthcare systems do try to create a consistency no matter where you're located, but there is always that piece of it. So one, you want to really focus your initial bill rate on the area. So like wherever you are, whether it's a 50-mile radius, Delaware is not a big state, so that's not always applicable, but what area are you looking to cover? Two, you want to do your research as far as what's going on in that market. So great places to look for research as far as like pay rates would be your social media, because in our industry, there is a transparency as far as agencies sharing, hey, this is how much we're offering, this is how much we're looking to pay. Also websites like salary.com, indeed.com, which encourages employers to put pay rates in place. So your bill rate really is based on your pay rate. So based on that, that's kind of how you come up with your bill rate, is once you determine your pay rate, and I encourage people to create a pay rate range. So you never want to say, hey, I'm going to pay $20 for CNAs in Delaware, no matter where they're located. One, you would probably get some pushback because, like I mentioned, you know, CNAs who may be in the northern part of Delaware, the cost of living is a little bit more. So those are all factors into how you determine their pay rate versus people who may be living in the more southern part of Delaware. The other thing is specialties. So our industry is heavily specialty based. In your more nursing support roles, it's not always a difference, but as you get into more, you know, LVN, LPN, RN, NP roles, there is an expectation that you're paid differently if you're working in an ICU versus a med surg versus a step down or labor and delivery. So you have to take that into account as well. And then you also want to think about your access to staff. So in most settings, there's more CNAs than there are nurses, or techs, PCTs than there are nurses. So that's also something that you want to take into consideration. So once you kind of determine your pay rate range for that particular role, then you want to take into variables as far as like cost of living, like if it's in a different part of a state, if it's closer to a metropolitan city, there is a little bit of an expectation to make more. Then you want to kind of look at what's happening in the market. And that's kind of where you can look at what are other agencies offering. You know, what does that pay look like from other agencies? And look at a couple. If you're a nurse or healthcare professional, you can always call. You can always inquire. That gives you the most accurate information. And the more you look at comparable agencies, so someone that's kind of in that same space as you are, the better. And having a range allows you to kind of be at, hey, this is the low end, this is the high end, you know, this is the highest that I can go when it comes to a bill rate. And then finally, some clients will kind of tell you where they're at. But finally, do your research, Google it, Chat GPT it. And mind you, those things aren't 100% accurate, but it'll give you starting numbers. It'll give you starting numbers around, hey, the average pay based on the census, based on these different factors, and this area has been this. You know, we know the average pay from the labor board for nurses, I think it's around $35. I want to say $32 to $35. So some of that information is free, accessible information. You also get it from your local chamber of commerce, Department of Labor. Those are all great resources when it comes to gathering the information and getting good, solid information. And then finally, something that a lot of people don't do, and we haven't done it, but I think it's worth trying, is do focus groups. So like bring together a couple of healthcare professionals, you know, offer them a gift of some sort and get their feedback. And I say that because of the pandemic, I think we've seen, and you guys chime in, please, we've seen a big change as far as like pay expectation for the nursing support roles. We've seen a big increase in the expectation to make, after the pandemic is over, that same pandemic pay. And I'm not here to question whether or not it should happen, but that does change how you would pay that individual if you have a client that's still trying to pay you maybe where we were pre-pandemic. So they're chill. If you have a client that may be billing pre-pandemic, but are only able to recruit applicants who are wanting to get money post-pandemic monies, similar to what happened during the pandemic, you kind of create a little bit of a challenge for yourself. And then finally, come up with a range that works best for your organization, taking into account any sort of fees, any sort of vendor management fees that you may have, any sort of payroll funding fees, if you have a back office. So those are all things that you would include. So if your bill rate was $40 for a nursing support role, and you had payroll funding and you had a vendor management, you want to incorporate those fees and really essentially what people refer to as the cost of doing business into that bill rate. Could it inflate the bill rate a lot? It could. And that's where having a range kind of allows you to say, hey, this is my lowest rate that I can do business at. But this is the rate that I think I would like to be when it comes to, making the profit margins that I'm looking to make. On average, and I'm not sure because I haven't looked it up recently, on average, profit margins can be 25 to 35% of your bill rate, but that doesn't take into account any fees or any monies that you have to pay for operating your business. So some people, when I say profit margin, is like, oh, well, I don't make that profit margin. That's not the case. Profit margin is different than your take home. So from an industry standard, the profit margin from what I've seen has been between like 22, 25, at the high end 30%. But this isn't accounting for any monies that you have to pay into the business to keep it running, which is primarily why it's a great idea to actually put those monies into the bill rate so that once the person is paid out, that money is actual fully, monies that the owner or manager or what have you takes home. So I hope that answered your question. I'm definitely interested in seeing how other people have managed that. I know there's been a lot of changes in our industry around how to facilitate that process post-pandemic. I think we're still experiencing a little muddy waters when it comes to creating a bill rate sheet, but main thing, pick an area. So you can't create a bill rate sheet for an entire state. 9 times out of 10, that's impossible. You want to think about any other factors. That's why I use CNA as the option. So like for nursing, there's step down, there's ER, there's different specialties. So you want to identify your bill rate in that way. And then the other thing that I forgot to mention was you want to think about, hey, in this state, do they do pay differentials? If you work 11 to 7, weekends, things like that. So that should be incorporated in your bill rate. And then of course, pay differentials, overtime bill rates, holiday pay, if you're in a state where you get double time or triple time, all of that should be factored into your bill rate sheet so that you can provide your client with all the different scenarios and information as far as how you would go about billing for those particular employees working for their organization. So I hope that helps. As always, drop your questions, drop your comments. Thanks again.